Get your hands off him! The shout cuts through the afternoon air like thunder. Outside Jefferson Middle School, chaos unfolds. A crowd of kids, a police officer gripping a small boy by the collar, and a mother running toward them like lightning. Her name is Naomi Carter. To everyone in the neighborhood, she's just Miss Carter, the quiet woman who runs a small diner and minds her own business. But right now, there's nothing quiet about her. "Ma'am, stay back," the officer snaps. Her son, Jalen, 13 years old, has tears in his eyes, his lips bleeding. She resisted, the cop says. This kid assaulted a student. Naomi's eyes burn with disbelief. "He's a child," she cries, standing between her boy and the badge. Students pull out phones, recording. Whispers ripple through the crowd. This isn't the first time that officer's gone too far. Naomi takes a breath, her voice low but sharp. "You made a mistake today, officer." The man smirks. "Yeah? And what are you going to do about it?" Naomi's gaze turns cold, the kind of cold that freezes blood. No one notices her hand trembling, not from fear, but restraint. Because deep inside, an old part of her, the one she buried years ago, just woke up. If you're already feeling the tension, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. This story's about to take a turn you won't see coming. Naomi drives home with Jalen in silence. The diner lights glow faintly in the distance. But tonight she's not thinking about customers or cooking. Tonight, she's thinking about vengeance. Because Naomi Carter wasn't always a diner owner. She was once known on the streets as Queen Nomi, the most feared strategist in the East Side Syndicate. And now, she's coming back. The diner sat at the corner of 5th and Leland, a cozy little place with chipped red booths, jazz music, and the smell of fried catfish drifting through the air. To most people, it was a neighborhood gem. To Naomi Carter, it was her sanctuary, her escape. But tonight, the sanctuary felt like a cage. Jalen sat at the counter, still shaken. His eyes darted toward his mother as she wiped down the same spot on the counter over and over. "Mom," he said quietly, "are you mad at me?" Naomi paused, her grip on the rag tightening. "No, baby, I'm mad at him." She set the cloth down, her voice trembling, not from fear, but from something older. Something buried. Flashback, 14 years ago, the sound of gunfire. Sirens, a young Naomi, barely 20, sprinting through an alley with a duffel bag and blood on her sleeve. Her name back then wasn't Naomi Carter. It was Queen Nomi, second in command of the East Side Syndicate, a criminal empire run on loyalty, silence, and precision. She was the mind behind every deal, every escape route, every untraceable move. But power has a price. When her partner, and Jalen's father, was killed in a crossfire she had orchestrated, Nomi disappeared. She burned her old life to ashes, took a new name, and built a life so ordinary it hurt. Back in the present, Naomi stares at the diner's window, seeing not her reflection, but the ghost of Queen Nomi staring back, a woman who knew how to make problems disappear. "Mom," Jalen says softly. "Are they going to get away with it?" She kneels down beside him, brushing his curls back. "No," she whispers. "Nobody hurts my son and walks away clean." That night, long after Jalen's asleep, Naomi goes into the back office, a room she hasn't entered in years. Underneath the floorboard, she pulls out a steel lockbox. Inside, a burner phone, an old revolver, and a faded photo of her syndicate crew. Her eyes linger on the photo, on one face in particular, Marcus Hale, her former right hand, now rumored to be a high-level informant working with the police. She exhales slowly, picks up the phone, and dials a number she swore she'd never call again. "Yo," a gruff voice answers after 2 rings. "This line's dead." "Who is this?" Naomi's voice is calm, low, deliberate. "It's Nomi." A pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Queen Nomi? You're supposed to be—" "Gone," she cuts in. "I was, but they hurt my boy." The silence that follows is heavy. Then the man chuckles darkly. "Damn, somebody's about to regret that." The streets hadn't changed, just the faces, different gangs, different hustlers, but the same smell of diesel, sweat, and ambition. Naomi Carter hadn't walked these blocks in more than a decade. Now, under the shadow of an old warehouse near the docks, Queen Nomi was walking again. The night air was thick, laced with the hum of generators and the echo of bass from some underground club nearby. She wore black, simple jeans, leather jacket, hair tied back tight. No jewelry, no weakness, just purpose. Inside the warehouse, 3 men turned at the sound of the door. One of them froze mid-conversation. "No way. That can't be. It's her," whispered another. "It's really her." Nomi stepped into the light. The man in the center, Rico, one of her former lieutenants, stared at her like he'd seen a ghost. "Nomi, I thought you were gone?" she said evenly. "I was, until someone put hands on my son." Rico's grin faded. "You don't want to go down that road again. You built this life, clean and quiet. Stay out." She leaned in close. "Tell me something, Rico. When did cops start bullying kids in our neighborhood? When did they stop fearing the people they swore to protect?" Rico shifted uneasily. "It's a different time now. Cops run the block. We just survive." Nomi smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made men nervous. "Then it's time to remind them who really runs it." A rusted door creaked open at the far end of the room. A tall man stepped out. Gray suit, black gloves. His walk was smooth, calculated. Marcus Hale, the last man she ever trusted. The one who betrayed her empire. Well, well, he said with a smirk. The Queen rises again. Nomi's expression didn't change. "Marcus?" He circled her slowly, like a vulture. "Word on the street says some rookie cop roughed up your boy. You really came back for that?" She looked him dead in the eye. "I came back because someone needs to learn what pain feels like." Marcus's smirk faltered. "You always were poetic before you pulled the trigger." The air grew heavy. Rico stepped forward, trying to diffuse the tension. "Look, we don't need another war. Marcus is with the cops now, an informant. That's why we still got peace." Nomi turned to Marcus. "So that's it? You feed them our names, they let you breathe?" Marcus shrugged. "Call it survival." Nomi took a step closer, her voice turning icy. "Survival's fine, until it costs someone else their child." A silence followed, the kind that only ends in violence. Then Nomi turned away, calm as ever. "Don't worry, Marcus. I'm not here for you. Not yet." Later that night, she sat in her car overlooking the police precinct. The same officer who humiliated Jalen earlier, Officer Brooks, was laughing with his buddies under the streetlight, cigarette in hand. Nomi watched from the shadows, eyes cold, calculating. The city lights reflected in the rearview mirror, painting her face half gold, half shadow, the perfect split between Naomi, the mother, and Queen Nomi, the avenger. She whispered to herself, "You wanted to see who I really am. You're about to find out." Then she dialed the burner phone again. "Rico, it's me. I need eyes on Officer Brooks. His schedule, his car, his life." Rico hesitated. "Nomi, you sure? Once you start this—" "There's no going back," she finished. A faint, bitter smile crossed her lips. There never was. Night settled over the city like a bruise, dark, quiet, and full of things best left unseen. In the small corner diner where the lights used to feel warm and safe, Naomi Carter sat alone. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she hadn't noticed. Her hands rested on the table, motionless, her eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. Somewhere beyond that window, in a world that still called her Miss Carter, people were laughing, driving, living ordinary lives. But inside that diner, a woman was being reborn. For years, Naomi had worn the mask of peace, the apron, the smile, the gentle tone. She had built a sanctuary out of the ruins of her past, buried her name, her power, and every trace of the woman she once was. But all it took was one moment, one act of cruelty against her son, and the mask cracked. Now, in its place, something ancient stirred, something people once whispered about in fear. Queen Nomi, the woman who had vanished, the strategist who outplayed killers and kingpins alike, was back. But this time, She wasn't fighting for a crown. She was fighting for her child. The plan began the way all her plans once did, in silence. Naomi spent the next few days studying every detail about Officer Brooks, the man who had humiliated her son. She didn't need anger. She needed information, his habits, his roots, his weaknesses. She discovered a man who wore arrogance like a shield, a man protected by the system he corrupted, a man who believed the uniform made him untouchable. She watched him from a distance, not as a mother, but as a hunter. Every time he smiled, every time he strutted past people who feared his authority, she saw the reflection of all the men who had once thought she was beneath them. The anger she felt wasn't loud. It was surgical, controlled. The kind of anger that doesn't destroy, it dismantles. Her first move was patience. She reopened old connections, people who still remembered the name Queen Nomi with a mix of respect and fear. They didn't see her as a mother or a victim. They saw the ghost of a legend. She didn't need their loyalty. She only needed their silence. Soon, she had eyes everywhere, every camera, every alley. Every conversation that could trace back to Brooks began to feed her story. And slowly, she began weaving a net around him, invisible, inescapable. What she found wasn't just corruption, it was rot. Brooks wasn't acting alone. There were deals happening inside the precinct. Dirty money changing hands. Arrests staged for headlines. Justice had become a business, and her son had been a casualty of its marketing. That realization didn't make her rage boil over. It made it colder, because now she understood the scale of what she was fighting. She wasn't just avenging Jalen, she was confronting a system that had learned to feed on the powerless. Naomi worked alone. She had no interest in allies. People were tools. And tools break when they're afraid. She planted whispers. In the right places, an anonymous tip to a journalist about missing evidence, a leaked file to a precinct rival hinting that Brooks might turn informant. Each seed was small, insignificant, until they began to grow. Paranoia spread like wildfire through the department. Brooks began to feel eyes on him. He stopped smiling so easily he started checking over his shoulder when he walked to his car. Naomi didn't need to see it to know. She could sense it. Fear has a scent, and she'd learned to recognize it long ago. But revenge has a rhythm, and Naomi knew when to pause. On quiet nights when Jalen was asleep, she would sit by his door. She'd listen to his breathing, soft and steady, like a promise she'd once made to herself that he would never grow up in her world. Yet here she was, dragging him back into it. Every choice she made weighed heavier than the last. The mother in her whispered to stop. The queen in her whispered to finish it. She remembered the years she'd spent building this peaceful life. Every meal she served, every laugh she shared with the customers who saw her as kindness itself. If they knew who she really was, would they still smile at her? Would her son still look at her the same way? That thought broke her more than the violence ever could. But pain had a purpose now. It was her compass, and it pointed straight to the men who thought they could harm her. Child and sleep peacefully after. The night she set her plan in motion, the sky was a curtain of black. The city slept unaware, but Naomi moved through it like a shadow. Every streetlight she passed flickered, as if the city itself knew something was coming. Inside her car, she reviewed the files once more, every piece of evidence she'd gathered, every secret hidden behind the badge, every thread that led back to one name, Marcus Hale. He had been her right hand years ago. Now, he was the puppet master behind the very corruption that had wounded her son. The circle had closed. She realized, in that moment, that she hadn't been chasing revenge. She had been chasing the ghost of her past, and it had led her home. In her mind, she saw it all play out like a chess game. Brooks was a pawn, arrogant, loud, disposable. Marcus was the king, untouchable, protected, powerful, and Naomi? She was the storm that wiped the board. Clean. Her plan was no longer about humiliation. It was about exposure. She wanted the city to see their heroes crumble under their own deceit. She spent nights editing footage, crafting a timeline that couldn't be denied. A single package, encrypted, undeniable, scheduled to be sent to every news outlet, every political contact, every social feed at the same time. One truth bomb to burn the illusion. But even as she prepared for victory, guilt crept in like a whisper. Every time she looked at her son, she saw the cost. Jalen didn't know what she was doing, but he could feel it, the warmth in her. Voice had faded. The light in her eyes was dimmer. The boy she once swore to protect from this world was now the reason she had returned to it. Was she still fighting for him or for herself? Was she avenging his pain or her pride? The question haunted her in every reflection, every shadow, and yet, even in doubt, she moved forward, because some wounds are too deep to heal with forgiveness. Some people only understand change when their world collapses. By the week's end, the city was trembling. Rumors of an internal scandal had leaked, and every headline hinted at something explosive. Brooks was under investigation. The department was under scrutiny. But Naomi knew this wasn't over, because the real power, the kind that never gets caught, still moved in silence. And Marcus Hale was still standing in that silence. Pulling strings like a ghost, Naomi wasn't satisfied with half measures. Justice had to mean something more than exposure. She wanted reckoning, and reckoning never comes without fire. As she stood by her window, the city lights below her blurred into gold and gray. Her hands were steady now. There was no trembling left in them. The mother who once served coffee to strangers had become the architect of a storm. The woman who once hid behind peace had found her weapon again. The queen was back, not for power, not for glory, but for a truth the world had forgotten. A mother's wrath is the oldest force on earth, and when it finally ignites, nothing, not even heaven, can put it out. Morning broke quietly over the city, but there was no peace in it. It felt like the sky was holding its breath, gray, heavy, waiting. Naomi Carter stood in her living room, surrounded by stillness. Every plan she had built, every step she had taken, had led to this morning. The storm she had crafted was about to break. Across the city, phones would buzz, screens would light up, and names that once hid behind power would be dragged into daylight. The file she'd prepared, the one filled with evidence, recordings, documents, was already in motion. It would be everywhere within the hour. There was no turning back. She took one last look at the photograph on the wall. Her and Jalen, smiling years ago before any of this, back when peace felt real. She reached out, brushed her fingers across the glass, and whispered something only she could hear. Not a promise, but a goodbye to the woman she used to be. Then she turned and walked away, across town. Chaos unfolded like a wave crashing into silence. Officers shouted. Phones rang. Reporters swarmed. The files had hit every outlet simultaneously. Untraceable, unstoppable. Screens filled with faces once thought untouchable. The chief, the prosecutor, and at the center of it all, Marcus Hale and Officer Brooks. The city's illusion of justice shattered in real time. The department scrambled to deny, to deflect, but the proof was too detailed, too perfect. It was like someone had peeled the skin off the truth and forced them all to look. Naomi didn't watch it on the news. She didn't need to. She felt it, the shift, the unraveling, as if the city itself was exhaling the lie it had been holding for too long. But revenge, she knew, was never clean. Even victory came with blood on its hands. By evening, the story had grown teeth. The media called it the blue firestorm. Politicians called it a tragic breach of trust. And the people called it what it was, justice. Naomi stayed hidden. But her name wasn't on any list. She had erased her traces before the storm began. The world would never know who had pulled the strings. Yet in the quiet of her mind, she knew the truth. She hadn't done this for headlines or legacy. She'd done it for a boy who once stood on a street corner, humiliated by a man who thought power meant cruelty. a boy who now slept peacefully, unaware that his mother had just set fire to the system that scarred him. But peace doesn't come easily to those who've seen too much. Naomi could feel it, the weight of it all pressing against her chest. Every lie exposed, every monster unmasked, came with a piece of her humanity chipped away. That night, she stood by her window, looking out at the flashing lights in the distance. Sirens screamed across the city, not as threats, but as cries of panic from a wounded machine. She could see the precinct from where she stood, chaos spilling into the streets. The empire of corruption she'd dismantled brick by brick was crumbling, just as planned. But in that victory, there was no joy, just silence, and the slow realization that vengeance doesn't heal, it consumes. When she went to check on Jalen, he was asleep, the soft glow of his nightlight warming the edges of the room. His breathing was calm, steady, safe. Naomi sat by the door again, the same way she had when she first started this war. Only this time, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. The tension that had kept her alive was finally fading, and in its place, exhaustion took root. She thought about the path she had chosen, how far she had fallen back into the life she swore she'd left behind. Every move she made had been for him, but the darkness she'd unleashed, it would echo. Somewhere someone would come looking. Someone always does. The system she burned would rebuild itself. And when it did, it would remember her name, even if the world didn't. In another part of the city, Marcus Hale sat alone in his office, staring at the screens filled with breaking news. His empire was collapsing. Account freezes, raids, partners abandoning ship. He'd built his kingdom on silence and fear, and both had betrayed him. But even in ruin, he was calculating. He knew someone had orchestrated this, someone with precision and power, someone who knew his playbook, and in the back of his mind, he could only think of one person who fit that description. He didn't need a name. He whispered it to himself like a prayer and a curse at once. Her. And even as the walls of his world fell around him, he couldn't help but smirk, because if Queen Nomi was back, the city was about to remember what real fear looked like. But Naomi didn't know that yet. To her, this night was the end. She sat outside her house under a sky bruised with smoke and stars, and let the cool air wash over her. The world was different now. Justice, or something that looked like it, had been served. Her son was safe. The city was awake, and she was tired. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she didn't hear the hum of danger in the distance, only the rhythm of her own heart, slow and steady, reminding her she was still alive. Days passed, the scandal continued to spread, pulling down more names, more faces. The people whispered about an unseen hand, a ghost who had turned justice on its head. But Naomi stayed silent. She cooked breakfast, walked Jalen to school, smiled when people greeted her, as if nothing had changed. To them, she was still just a mother, but deep inside, she knew that part of her, the part that once ruled the streets, would never sleep again. She had tasted her old self once more, and the taste was bittersweet, because the truth was, she hadn't just avenged her son, she had reclaimed her crown. One night, long after the city had quieted, Naomi stood by her window again, the reflection staring. Back at her wasn't the woman who'd once served coffee with gentle hands. It was someone older, sharper. Mother, a queen. And somewhere between those two versions of herself, she found peace, not in forgiveness, but in control. Because maybe that's what survival really means. Not escaping your past, but owning it so completely that it can never be used against you again. She turned off the lights, walked down the hall, and peeked into her son's room. He stirred slightly, smiled in his sleep, and in that quiet, Naomi finally allowed herself to smile too. The world could spin however it wanted. The police could rebuild. The powerful could rise again, but they would always remember There are lines you don't cross, and one of them is a mother protecting her child. The story of Queen Nomi wasn't one of revenge. It was a warning, because when they hurt her son, they didn't just awaken a mother, they resurrected a legend, and legends never fade quietly.